Who I am is not important. All you need to know is this. For the past 5 years, I've been part of the NASA team that looks after the Voyager 1 probe as it travels further and further away from the Earth. We have helped keep it functional for decades after its expected lifetime, and at a distance of 14.5 million miles away from Earth. It is really a marvel of human engineering. If you're interested in our work, you've probably read in recent news about the unexplained malfunctions that the craft have been suffering from. It's true that the probe is experiencing difficulties, but that's not even half of it. God, it's not even a malfunction at all. Blame the government suits for that lie. The probe's orientation in space is managed by a system called the AACS, which stands for Attitude, Articulation and Control System. Normally, the AACS makes sure that the Voyager has its antenna pointed to Earth, so that it can both send and receive signals. That is how we get the data the probe collects, and that is how we make sure it will stay functional for as long as possible. 2 weeks ago, we started receiving information from the AACS that simply could not be true. We checked, then double-checked, but there was no mistake. The data we were getting contained a single confounding piece of information. The probe had stopped. It was, to put it simply, hanging motionless in space. We scrambled to find the source of the error. Had the AACS broken down, sending us flawed information? Or was it some other system that had broken? Thankfully, the fault protection software hadn't triggered, and that would have shut down all but the most essential functions of the probe. As it was, we could run all the tests and diagnostics we needed. No one considered even for a second that the readings were correct. That would be ludicrous. But, day after day, we found nothing. As far as we could see, there was no malfunction at all. Nothing had broken or gone wrong. For all we could tell, the AACS was working just fine, and the probe was indeed just hanging in space. NASA higher-ups berated us and told us to look again. Probes don't just stop, they told us. There's something we're missing here. There has to be. A monotonous, unfulfilling week followed. More tests, more diagnostics. Same result every time. In desperation and at our wits' end, we attempted to instruct the probe to rotate or start moving again. The thrusters complied, but the Voyager remained stubbornly in place. Our approach to the situation changed. We shut down all the systems aboard the Voyager, and, going one by one, switched them back on and checked their functionality down to the smallest detail, only moving on to the next after we had made absolutely sure that they were running without any issues. A breakthrough. Without our prompting, the onboard plasma wave instrument, essentially a sensor that detects waves of electrons in the interstellar space that the probe travels through, had switched back on and begun sending data to us. Understandably, this caused quite a stir. Equipment turning on and off of its own accord. Now that was a problem. There was a feeling of doom in the air. Suddenly, the idea of losing Voyager 1 after so many decades seemed all too real. The data from the plasma wave instrument can be listened to, since the waves it detects take place on frequencies that the human ears can detect. Naturally, we decided we should listen to whatever recordings it had sent back. From the very beginning, the data was bizarre. Normally, the sound of the plasma wave instrument is a monotonous, eerie hum, the background noise of the interstellar void. The recording we received was nothing like that. Rather, it was a series of rapid spikes, a bleeping wailing sound, irregular, punctuated by bouts of almost silence. Our team was dumbfounded. What did it mean? Another faulty reading? A space anomaly? At this point, we were coming to terms with losing the probe altogether. I guess it wasn't that far-fetched. Voyager 1 was operating decades past its expected lifetime. It had always been a possibility that it would simply break down one day. As we sat in the listening room, pondering and arguing, one of my colleagues, a genius and one-time child prodigy named McKinley, suddenly sat straight up. I looked over at him. His face was wrapped with fascination. God above. I've got it. It's Morse code. There was a second of silence. Ridiculous, someone sneered from across the room. How could it? Listen to it, McKinley insisted. The spikes, the punctuation, the breaks. It's Morse, I tell you. He grabbed a paper and a pencil and began playing the recording back again, mumbling under his breath. P. E. R. A. After a few minutes, he sat up and lifted the paper into the air. Per aspera ad astra, he declared victoriously. The room exploded with frantic activity. People shouting over each other, asking questions, voicing confusion, and drawing hypotheses. That phrase, per aspera ad astra, was known to all of us. When the Voyager probes were launched, NASA attached something called the Golden Records to them, a phonograph record meant as a message to any extraterrestrials they might encounter out in the void. The records contained everything from music to the sounds of nature to recorded greetings in 55 languages. And, last but not least, there was a Morse code message, per aspera ad astra, through hardship to the stars, a motivational quip sent to our interstellar neighbors. More recordings came in, even as we argued among ourselves. These readings were impossible. They couldn't be real. We were receiving all the sounds stored on the Golden Records, distortedly played back to us through the readings of the plasma wave instrument. Birdsong, music, even the sound of Carl Sagan's son saying hello. With each reading, the room grew more quiet, more subdued, as the truth dawned on us all. Something was out there, was listening to the golden recording. And then, the AACS went haywire. Suddenly, there was movement where just a second before there had been none. Our systems were flooded with locational data, and my heart plummeted as I realized what was happening. The Voyager had started moving again at speeds no human creation should be capable of. It was hurtling through space, and it was heading back towards the Earth. I understand now. I understand why this is happening. The recordings aren't the only thing on that disc. There's so much more. Diagrams of human biology, of our culture, of the solar system. Dear God. It all leads right back to Earth. On January 25, 1994, a joint space mission between NASA and the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization launched a satellite named Clementine. This is fact. Its official mission was to investigate the asteroid 1620 Geographos. This is also fact. Everything else was a lie. Describe your surroundings, Clementine. Gravity is denser than expected, Houston. Please run calculations to compensate for an additional gravitational pull of 2.58 newtons for liftoff velocity. Roger that. We'll get our guys to work on this. What else can you tell us about the asteroid? It's gray, as far as visibility permits. The terrain is pockmarked with craters, except for the landing zone. The craters are of differing impact radius. She's been exposed to eons of bombardment. Surprised she's still holding together, really. She. Feels like a she, Houston. Roger that, Clementine. Your rock, your call. Damn right. Setting up the sub-sonar probe now. ETA 10 minutes. Radio silence. 12 minutes. Houston? Are my sensors distorted? Or do you see the same weird data as I do? One moment, Clementine. Voices debate in the background. Checks here say your sensors should be working fine. We confirm that the data appears genuine. This indicates a geometrically angular substructure, Houston. That is affirmative, Clementine. The broadcast signal must be powered from somewhere. Underground seems the most logical location given the craters. I'll admit to feeling a little overwhelmed at this confirmation, Houston. A perfectly human reaction to have. We'd give you a moment to process, but time won't permit it. Scans from the probe indicate an opening of 0.7 meters to the southeast. Clementine, can you reach it? Affirmative. Heading there now, Houston. Radio silence. 9 minutes. There's a darker patch of Earth in this area. More black than gray. Is there a door? I'm unsure of what an alien door will look like. One moment, Houston. Radio silence. 2 minutes. I found an opening, Houston. The rock here has a darker sheen to it. Almost metallic. I think I can use the driver to lift it up. Do I proceed, Houston? Voices debate in the background. Yes. Please go ahead, Clementine. Panting heard over the radio. Whew. That took some muscle. It's open, Houston. Not a drop-off as I assumed. There's a slope heading gradually inside. Do I proceed? Affirmative, Clementine. Please proceed. Roger that, Houston. Comms might be disrupted. We don't think so, Clementine. Your frequency has been designed to piggyback off whatever signal booster is being used. They are using radio waves. I am unable to decide if that's comforting or concerning. Proceeding inside, Houston. Radio silence. 45 seconds. Astronaut voice now in whispered tones. The passage appears to be hewn into the asteroid. It's the same gray rock as the surface. Only the construction is obviously precise, and let's leave it at constructed. The ceiling is low, very low, just a few inches taller than my suit, so perhaps 5'5" at the most. Makes me feel claustrophobic. You're doing great, Clementine. Keep going. I can see it get wider up ahead. I don't know what's there, so please give me radio silence until I speak again, Houston. Acknowledged, Clementine. Radio silence. 45 minutes. A static burst comes over the radio before a voice in the burst of whispers can be heard. Houston, are you there? Please tell me you're there. We're here, Clementine. Are you okay? No, I'm not okay. It's never going to be okay. Clementine? Jane. My name is Jane. Okay, Jane. This is Raj. Tell me what's wrong. They're hunting me. The aliens? Can you describe them? Squat, but strong. 4 legs, triple jointed, and each seems to move independently. No eyes. They have some dark metallic sheen as the rock. They look inorganic. Why do you think they're hunting you? I was so careful. Or I thought I was. I only snuck my head out into the opening. 3 of them were at a machine, the signal booster. 2 of them had limbs inside the machine. Didn't think they heard me. Didn't think they saw me. But they did. What happened, Clem? What happened, Jane? There was this screeching sound, like metal on metal, and the freestanding one began coming towards me, not walking or running, but little short jumps that carried it far. I was frozen, couldn't move, couldn't react. One of them reached me, put a limb out and tried to touch me. I freaked and shoved the driver at it in panic. It ate it. The driver, that stainless steel heavyweight of a tool, ate it like it was butter, touched it with its limb and absorbed it into itself. So I kicked on its body and ran. Felt like kicking rock, but I tossed it back enough for it to fall over. Crying is heard over the radio. Please, I want to come home. I'm scared. It won't take long to find the ship. Please. Radio silence. 38 seconds. Jane? Jane, I'm sorry, but... Jane, that won't be possible. What do you mean? The additional gravitational pull. We can't compensate for it. There isn't enough fuel to give you the needed momentum to lift off. Is this... No. Please, God, no. I'm so sorry, Jane. We're sorry. There must be some... A screeching sound comes over the radio. Metal on metal grating. No, fuck, they found me. Houston, help me. Please, Rush. Screams heard over the radio. Feed goes dead. My name is Rush. In 1994, I was the communications liaison for the Clementine mission. I'm dying. This, and only this, is why I've chosen to release the transcript of what transpired during Clementine, and to honor the memory of astronaut Jane, of the US Air Force, who gave her life to bring us the world-altering knowledge we now possess. There is a race of beings transmitting an invitation from asteroid 1620 to the human race on frequency. We thought this invitation was benevolent. It is not. It was a cold, rainy and eerie night when the blissful veil of ignorance was lifted from my eyes. This is not a story about astronomy. I am a mere college professor, teaching subjects seldom related to the cosmos. This is a story about how easy it is for unknown forces to manipulate the whole mankind. If memory serves, Orcus had been one of the first planets to be discovered through modern telescopes. Despite its proximity to the Earth, in ancient times, astronomers were unable to see it due to its color that made it blend in almost perfectly with the void around it. I never gave Orcus a lot of thought, other than when I had to talk about it in my classes. Orcus had a unique black atmosphere, which had been speculated to be compounded by crude oil decades ago. Needless to say, a certain country took an obsessive interest in it. I remember that the exploration of Orcus, initiated no more than a decade after the successful landing on the moon, was very low-key for something this big. You would eventually read an article on new evidences that its atmosphere could actually be a gold mine, and how that certain government was making heavy investments towards sending a manned expedition to it. But back then, a lot of other discoveries were being made, from infrared satellites being released to exoplanets being found. It was a subject of interest for chemistry, but not enough to come up more often than once a year. And every year, I showed my first-term students the same PowerPoint presentation about the chemical composition of all planets, focusing on Orcus, unanimously considered the coolest of all by my classes. Up until 2012, everything went smoothly. Then, 2013 came, and the faces in the classroom were either confused or amused, but in a way that showed I was the butt of the joke. "What's the problem?" I asked, truly ignorant. I looked at the current slide, half expecting it to show me in my underwear dancing with my dog. But there was nothing wrong with it. It was about Orcus. "Did you just make up a planet, Professor?" one of my most competent students asked. "Don't be silly. All of you know very well all the planets. Everyone's been in elementary school, right? How many planets are there in the solar system, sir? Another student asked, with a tone almost too benevolent, like I was some dying man who forgot his own name. 10 or 9. Pluto comes and goes. But other than that, it's Mercury, Venus, Earth, Orcus, Mars. Sir? Oh, why not try Googling this planet Orcus? A third student carefully suggested. I complied, still half thinking they had organized an elaborate prank, but slightly nervous. No results. They all looked at me with such pity that I dismissed the class and spent most of my morning crying in the parking lot. I was getting old and mad. The next day, I was summoned to the dean's office. The university, almost too generously, offered sending me to an isolated research facility where I could develop my studies full-time and still get 70% of my teacher's salary. Twice divorced with no kids and rarely visited by my few living relatives, I gladly accepted it. And in a matter of days, I was renting my house while moving halfway across the country to work alone. Besides, I was too embarrassed to return to the classroom. My lodging was a pleasant cottage, with a great lab for one behind it. My bedroom had a nice view to distant deep blue mountains, and the university sent me a housekeeper once a week. She even brought me groceries. From 2013 to now, life was a blur of immersing myself in my work, improving my baking abilities, and talking to no one. The housekeeper was Russian, and when she showed signs of learning English, she was replaced by a Brazilian one. It was early February when Sarah knocked on my door, a former student of mine who had become a brilliant astronomer. I finally found you. You remember Orcus too, right? I gladly let her in. The first visit I had in almost a decade, and made us some good tea from the herbs I've been growing myself. You sleep with noise-cancelling headphones playing white noise, right? She asked. I shook my head no, then remembered that I used to before I lived among all this peace and quiet. Her face switched from determination to a shard of panic, then confidence. I know it had to be it. That's how they didn't catch our memory then, she observed. She then proceeded to tell me everything she knew about the fourth planet of the solar system. And it was a lot. The night came, cold and wet, and I had her stay. She didn't protest. In fact, it seemed to be her plan all along. Although I was over twice her age, I became her apprentice for the next 2 weeks. When I realized Orcus was no more, I kept my mouth shut. They made the university send you on a retreat, and that was clever. You were completely neutralized. But being an astronomer, I'm a different story. People will start to believe the truth if it comes from me. So promise me that if I ever disappear, you'll make public everything I told you. I promised. No matter what they do to me, she added, under her breath. It didn't take long. We didn't realize that the housekeeper was probably forced to report anything different in the house. On the first week, Sarah managed to hide, but probably suspicious that things were a lot different in the house and afraid to be punished. The maid rummaged through the lab until she found my partner in crime. It was another cold and rainy night when they came. First, the lights all went out. Then the shadows surrounding us became solid. Sarah let out a pain scream, an unnaturally raspy and robotic voice, so emotionless that it felt evil. Stop pursuing Orcus. I passed out. And when I woke up in the morning, Sarah was gone. The signs of struggle were everywhere. Slowly, I started putting back together the damaged furniture. The next day, as to leave no doubts they were serious, they sent me Sarah's index finger inside a Tiffany blue box. I thought that maybe, if I actually made a conscious effort to forget it all, she would be released. I kept my mouth shut and focus my whole mind on my research, although it felt pointless now. But over the next few weeks, I received more boxes with their body parts. So here's my story. For Sarah. I don't have a lot of time, as I noticed solid shadows moving around, just waiting until nightfall to catch me. But I'll summarize what I learned from her. Between the years 2005 and 2011, NASA discovered that Orcus's blackness wasn't due to its atmosphere, but due to the singular nature of the planet and the living things on it. It's hard to explain, but basically the beings on the planet are one. A black, sentient mass that can shapeshift on virtually anything. Of course, this information was a secret. By 2012, Sarah herself had discovered a groundbreaking information. The Orklings fed on thoughts and knowledge. They phagocyted all the space probes that NASA sent to Orcus right after the information was transmitted, indicating that they wanted to be found out. Knowing that a disaster was on its way to wipe away mankind, a selected group of plutocrats requested a deal with Orcus. They complied. On December 21, 2012, there was a worldwide blackout, although this knowledge was wiped out too. When we woke up, things were off, but similar enough for us to go on about our lives. Not even Sarah knows how they did that. But there's no doubt. Take a good look at everything around you. Are things actually normal? When you turn off the lights and stay very still, don't you feel something solid and quiet moving in the shadows? I know that your memory was eaten, but if you really put your mind on it, you'll realize that the world you're seeing now is nothing but a simulacrum of how life on Earth used to be. Because the planet that disappeared without a trace wasn't Orcus. It was the Earth. Proxima Centauri is a low-mass star that is part of the southern Centauri constellation. The star is 4.24 light-years away from Earth. If you had a powerful enough laser, it would take the beam of light 4.24 years to get to the star. When you look up at the star, you're actually perceiving it as it was 4 years ago. The current fastest moving object made by man is the original Voyager probe. It is traveling over 35,000 miles per hour, and even at such an extreme velocity, it would take thousands of years to reach the star. The only practical way to get there is via faster-than-light travel, or FTL for short. According to Einstein, a fundamental rule of the universe is nothing but light itself can go that fast. The year was 2037, and that was the year we broke that rule. But at what cost? My name's James Anderson. I've been in the Air Force for 15 years, and it's always been said I was the best man they ever had. 2 years ago, I got an invitation from NASA to take part in a groundbreaking project. NASA was always a dream of mine. As a boy, I had always dressed up as an astronaut for Halloween and read basically all the books on them and the history of spaceflight. Joining the Air Force was the next best thing, and I ended up enjoying it a lot. I was stationed at Edwards Air Force Base as a test pilot for experimental fighters. The director of the project went by the name of Dr. Robert Butler. Robert was a tall ginger man with a brain that would even make Einstein envious. Robert was the person who personally invited me to partake in this project. I accepted almost instantly when he called, and we set up a meeting to discuss details. The meeting place was a nondescript office building in the middle of Bethesda, MD. Robert's office was probably the cleanest room I had ever been in. He had a huge mahogany desk with a computer monitor that spanned almost half of the desk on the corner. Behind him was a bookshelf full of books and miniature aircraft models. A pleasant autumn aroma filled the air from the incense he had burning in the other side of the room. Robert sat me down with a handshake and started. "Hello, James. Thank you for meeting with me today." "Thank you for having me. I'm excited to explore the opportunities in front of me," I responded eagerly. "Let's get the formalities out of the way so we can get down to business. I need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement as this project is classified top secret," he continued. Robert slid me a thick document. As I suspected, it was the aforementioned agreement. I had signed thousands of these in the past, so I knew the drill. It basically said that if you discussed the project with anyone outside his scope, it was considered treason. I promptly signed the document with the expensive fountain pen he had on his desk, half expecting him to leap out of his seat, telling me it was a display piece only. He didn't. Passing the document back to him and returning the pen, I thanked him and asked, "So, what is this groundbreaking project you speak about?" "Are you familiar with the theoretical physicist Mikhail Alcubierre?" Robert asked with a curious expression. "I have read about him. He theorized a way to travel faster than light. But that theory was disproved a long time ago," I retorted. Robert sat back on his chair and went on. "What if I told you we recently revised his work and put it into practice?" Another question popped into my head. Mikhail's FTL engine required significant power to function. Nothing in the world can create that much energy. "Yes, James. A legitimate question. The scientists at the CERN Large Hadron Collider have been able to find a way to produce large amounts of antimatter. We have produced enough for a trip to Proxima Centauri and back with a little extra," he answered. "So, you've built a ship?" I asked. "Yes, we're calling it the Triste, after the submersible piloted by Jacques Picard that dove into the deepest depths of the ocean. It seemed the most appropriate," Robert replied. I was humbled to be part of something so much bigger than myself. I would have a chance to shape the future of mankind and affect many generations ahead of me. My heart started beating rapidly as I inquired, "How fast does it go?" "According to our calculations, the Triste has a max velocity of 32.47 times the speed of light. And you're going to be her pilot," he answered, as if waiting for this question the whole time. Before I could ask the date of the flight, he handed me a contract that outlined the whole project. Upon signing the contract, Robert set me up with living accommodations and held out his hand. I shook it and left to move into the apartment he provided for me. After I settled in for a week, Robert invited me back to a spacious conference room to meet the others who would join me in this pioneering flight. Robert called 4 people into a line, each at the top of their respective fields and eager to change history. The first I was introduced to was engineer Dr. Pravina Cook. Pravina designed and helped construct the reactor and the FTL drive. She was a shorter woman, maybe just over 5 feet, with long dark hair in her 30s. What she lacks in height, she makes up for in intelligence. The next person I was introduced to was Dr. Haruto Moon. Dr. Moon was the medical doctor. He was tall, with short hair and a suit. Haruto was recently in the running to become Surgeon General, so NASA jumped at the opportunity to invite him. Then, I met the chief scientist, Dr. Elizabeth Murphy. Elizabeth was one of the most beautiful women I've ever set my eyes upon. Her eyes were like diamonds. My gaze was transfixed on her smiling face, before the man next to her cleared his throat. I snapped out of it and shook her hand, and his. The man was the commanding officer of the Triste, Colonel Edward Thompson. Thompson didn't look like the colonels I've worked with over the years. He was short and thin, so not very intimidating. I showed him the proper respect nonetheless. Before our handshake was finished, he leaned down to my ear and whispered, "I saw how you looked at Elizabeth. That's not what this mission is about. So if you would kindly keep your dick in your pants, this will all go ever so smoothly." I nodded before joining him in the line. Robert handed us each a glass of champagne and gave a toast. To new horizons. We all clinked our glasses and socialized. The next day was orientation. We all met in the same conference room. It was the day I finally got to see the tree. Although it was only a render on the wall, it looked like I was looking at the real thing. At the front of the craft was a large spherical command structure, probably where we controlled everything. Behind the sphere was what looked like a communications array. Then there were the reactors sandwiched between two vast rings. The rings were the main component of the FTL drive. Behind that, at the direct aft of the ship, were the main engines for standard propulsion. Flanking the reactor were two cylindrical tanks for the fuel. One had antimatter, and the other tank contained matter. Those two substances emit vast amounts of energy when combined. The reactor controlled that and converted it to energy. Robert began by explaining why he chose Proxima Centauri. As you may know already, Proxima Centauri is the closest star to Earth other than the Sun. This makes it an excellent candidate for this project. That's not the only reason we chose it though. For a little over 40 years, that star has been emitting bursts of ultra-high energy radio waves. When analyzed, the signal is random in nature, basically bursts of static. Don't stars emit all kinds of waves? I questioned. Yes, James, you are correct. The remarkable thing about these ones is, they happen every hour on the dot. If that wasn't strange enough, every burst is completely identical. He continued. The room fell silent, as everyone was in a state of shock. Robert chuckled. That was my exact reaction. Your task is to travel to the star and use the equipment you bring along to study it and find out what causes the signals. I smiled when I saw the joy in Elizabeth's face. Stars were her area of study. Robert began answering more questions we had. Some important particulars stood out to me. The Trieste is still under construction and orbit. It will take 1.5 months to reach the star at max speed, and we are scheduled to depart in 1 year after vigorous training. Our orientation ended, and I went home. NASA put my body to its extreme upper limit over that year. I had never been tested like that, not even during my time in the Air Force. One of the simulations, they put me in a chair attached to a spinner that spun incredibly fast to simulate G-forces. Another time, I was put in a chamber for several hours under high atmospheric pressure to see how I responded to the change. After many tests like this, me and my shipmates were ready to go. The launch day had arrived. This was a top-secret mission, so the trip to the Soyuz rocket that would take us up was oddly void of reporters. I didn't have anyone to say bye to, which was one of the reasons I was selected, as there was every chance the ship could just explode. The Soyuz rumbled to life as it violently carried us up. I had never been so uncomfortable in such a comfortable seat. Eventually, the rumbling stopped, and I felt without weight. Moments later, Elizabeth screamed with excitement.
Look!
I watched out the window. Before me was the Trieste in all her magnificence. It was surrounded by the scaffolding used to help in the construction. The capsule docked with the ship, and we boarded. Before me was the command center and the finest technology that humanity had to offer. At the front was a single grand console, my console, used for navigation. The ship oddly had gravity, although I didn't know how it worked. I hiked across the spacious room to my console, so I could examine it. To my left was a small joystick, like you would find on an arcade cabinet. It was used to control the reaction control thrusters that steered the ship. There was a camera system there, so I could see where we were going. Directly in front of me was an extensive celestial map, so I could see where we were and plot courses. Overlaying the map were the controls for the FTL drive, which were simple. Proving I handled the complicated aspects naturally. Finally, to my right was a simple throttle for the main engines, and a multifunction display for factors like power levels and velocity. Colonel Thomas shouted, "All right, everyone, to your stations." Provina and Elizabeth took to their stations on either side of me. Elizabeth's station showed full access to the full suite of sensors and scanners installed on the ship, and they allowed her to study the star. I don't know how to explain Provina's console, as it was too complex for me. My job at the moment was to make sure that the navigation system was aligned, and the engines were ready to fire so we could head out. We spent a couple of hours preparing as the scaffolding around the ship was taken away. Robert called over the radio.
"All right, everything looks good from our end. Proceed whenever you're ready."
"Thank you, Robert. We will contact you when we are in position to go lightspeed," replied the colonel. "James, take us out," he ordered. I tapped on my console, firing up the engines, and the ship gained speed. We could not perceive it due to the artificial gravity. The ship needed to be far from Earth in case of disaster. If the ship were to go up, it would be equivalent to 500 megatons of TNT. The engines were incredibly powerful. On one camera, it gave me a view behind the ship, and the Earth was visibly getting smaller. Eventually, we got out of range. I cut the engines and let the trees to coast. "We are in position, sir," I informed Thomas. He relayed the information to control. "This is it, people. Charge the rings, James," he instructed. I started the charge sequence, and the ship began to hum as the rings roared to life. Looking at the readout, it read 2 minutes to charge. 2 minutes to charge, I shouted excitedly. There was an atmosphere of anxiety and excitement. Nobody there wasn't worried. My panel turned green as the coils finished charging. The colonel knew this and had a seat. After the click from his harness, he addressed the crew. "Whatever happens, you all have done this country proud. James, engage." I had the biggest smile on my face as I nodded and did as instructed. We heard a loud burst of energy. Colors dazzled our eyes as we gazed out the front window. What followed was an unnerving silence. I came to my senses and studied at the panel in front of me. "Holding steady at 24.5 C. We are stable," I exclaimed. A wave of relief washed over all of us before we started celebrating. What I saw out the window is hard to explain. It was like we were flying through a blue tunnel of light. Provina promptly checked the drive for any issues. She found none. We all congregated in the mess area for a meal, while Dr. Moon examined himself and the rest of us for any negative effects of a transition to lightspeed. To his amazement, we all looked perfectly healthy. Dinner was disgusting freeze-dried chicken, or what looked like chicken and tasted like rubber. Despite the horrible cuisine, we were all happy as could be. To us at the time, we just made history. It was the life goal of every human being. We were proud. Soon, it was time to sleep for the long trip. Thompson ushered the crew into the sleeping chamber, and we each got into our respective pods. The pods were programmed to wake us up 5 hours before we reached Proxima Centauri. Provina checked over the systems methodically before getting into her own pod. She didn't want there to be any problems while we were sound asleep. As my pod closed, I felt claustrophobic before gently drifting into a deep slumber. I awoke, seemingly minutes later, to a blinding light. Dr. Moon and Elizabeth, with those beautiful eyes, were standing above me. She smiled, saying, "We're here, James." I slowly sat up and got out of my pod. The 2 other crewmates were awake as well. Dr. Moon gave me a pill to help me recover from the extended rest, and I got out of my pod. Thomas asked me where we were. The trudge to my console was a little bit awkward, as it felt like I was learning to walk for the first time again. The console read an ETA of 4 hours, 13 minutes and 53 seconds. I turned to Dr. Moon. I thought we were supposed to wake at 5 hours, not 4 1/4. You're right. We had a little trouble with your pot. It wouldn't open, he replied with a concerned expression. The crew and I spent the remaining 4 hours checking systems and getting food in our bodies. It was fish this time, equally rubbery as the chicken. Eventually, it came time to shut down the drive as we had arrived. I shut it down, and the ship came to a stop. There was a blinding light out the window. I was looking at another star. It just sunk in, the gravity of what we had just accomplished. I don't think I was the only one with that feeling. Thomas shouted an instruction. "Bring us into orbit of the star, James." With a permanent smile on my face, I acknowledged and used my console to fire up the engines and put us into orbit. "Are we able to filter out all the blinding light?" Thomas asked unanimously. Elizabeth spoke up. "The window has one. I'll activate it." My heart hit the deck plating with an audible thud. When she activated the filter, I observed the star being covered in green vine-like structures. It almost seemed organic. Proxima Centauri looked alive. It was visibly throbbing. I was visibly terrified at the sight. "What the hell? That's not what a star is supposed to look like," Thompson said, shocked. Elizabeth tapped her panel with determination. She concluded that, with spectrographic analysis, the star was indeed organic. There was nothing in her analysis that pointed to it being a star of any classification, other than the blinding light it emitted. How could we not have seen it with our instruments on Earth? I concluded it was somehow able to trick them from that vast distance. Elizabeth noted with a puzzled expression. "I don't understand how this is possible." "How long until the next radio burst?" Thompson asked. 5 minutes, she replied as she checked her panel. As we waited, I was a nervous wreck. 5 minutes came and went. The radio pulse came and went as well. I felt a slight tingling sensation, but it was harmless. We were monitoring the signal, and it was the same as previously recorded pulses according to Elizabeth. "What do you make of all this, Dr. Moon?" the colonel asked without diverting his gaze. Moon didn't respond. I could hear soft, high-pitched wheezing coming from his direction. The colonel noticed too and turned around. Dr. Moon was completely motionless. Assuming he was just daydreaming, Thompson shouted, "Dr. Moon!" What happened next was the most disturbing, frightening things I've ever witnessed. That's saying something, coming from a soldier like myself. Moon started convulsing violently, before slowly changing into something. His arms, his legs, his fingers, his toes, his neck, all grew to double their length. Sharp teeth descended from his gums, and existing teeth broke into sharp points. His jaw disconnected from his skull, giving him a gaping, terrifying maw. One of the panels behind him gave me a reflective view of his back. His back split apart, exposing his spine with each vertebrae having long jagged spikes protruding from them like a dinosaur. The same sort of spikes were also protruding from all joints of his body. His skin turned a dark green color and was now ripped, exposing bone and a powerful muscular structure. There was nothing recognizable left. I sprinted at Elizabeth and grabbed her arm as we raced to safety. Pravina followed. But Colonel Thompson, rest his soul, wasn't so lucky. Moon, or what we thought was Moon, lunged at him with a high-pitched, unnatural screech, thrusting both arms in the Colonel's chest, aided by the spikes that grew on the knuckles. Thompson didn't make a sound, just went limp, with his arms dangling below him. His motionless body was lifted off the ground. I winced with horror. There was an explosion of blood and gore as the creature separated its arms, ripping already deceased Colonel Thompson in half. His blood-soaked insides were scattered all over the room. In all of my years of military service, I've never seen something even remotely more disturbing. With no time to mourn our fallen comrade, we moved into the mess and closed the door, locking it. The two girls were sobbing. None of us wanted to talk about what just happened, or what caused it. Pravina noted, still sobbing. We need to kill it. Nobody ever guessed to pack weapons on this ship, as it was a mission of exploration, and this occurrence would never show up in any manual. The three of us collected ourselves, and I cracked open the door. Moon was pacing the room and noticed me. He produced another loud screech and charged at me. I got back inside just in time, and he started banging on the door relentlessly. "Try and find something I can use as a weapon," I said frantically. "We may not need one. The main airlock is in the room with it. There is a console in the communications room opposite this door that can open it," Pravina said, still shaking with fear. I opened the door, and the creature was in the middle of the room, standing above the colonel, as if it was admiring its latest kill. I threw a piece of metal past it, and the creature jumped at where it hit the ground. I gathered all the strength and determination I could muster, and bolted for the communications room door. The creature saw me, and got within inches, but I made it and sealed the door behind me. Moon, as if he knew what was about to happen, pounded much louder than before, almost desperate. I used the auxiliary console to increase the pressure and blow out the airlock. The environment outside the door sounded like a wind tunnel. The pounding ceased. I could hear it frantically claw at the ground before a loud puff sound as it flew out helplessly. I resealed the airlock and pressurized. Upon opening the door, both the creature and the colonel were gone, with deep claw marks in the ground and around the airlock. To my horror, I looked up, and it had completely trashed the command deck. All the consoles were destroyed with no way to use them. We were dead in the water with no way to control the ship. I called the girls out as it was safe. They both took on a shocked face when presented with the carnage. "Can we activate the drive from the reactor room?" I asked Pravina. "Yes, but we have no navigational control," she replied skeptically. With haste, we made our way to the reactor control room. The room was dissimilar from the rest of the ship. It had an industrial design. Pravina did her magic to try and charge the rings before another burst. There was no way to know which one of us would change into that thing. Her fingers tapped away at an inhuman pace. She froze. "No, no, no, no!" Pravina screamed. "What?" Elizabeth and I responded in unison. "The rings aren't charging. The creature must have hit one when he flew out of the airlock," she said with a defeated look on her face. I felt as if the entire universe was trying to kill us. The three of us went to a window. We were shocked to discover that there was a deep gash on the side of one of the rings. That meant the only chance we had was the main engines. We could get far enough away to try to fix the rings with a spacewalk. We had no way of knowing how far the pulse had an effect, and wasted no time starting them up from the reactor room. Pravina put all available power to the engines, including the power from life support. 30 minutes later, we were going fast enough that I could perceive the organic star drifting away slowly. There were 15 minutes until the next burst. The three of us took shelter with nothing left to do, and separated ourselves with doors between us, just in case we were not far away enough from the star. The engines were still going. We were keeping in constant contact using the internal comm system. Elizabeth monitored for the burst. The three of us had never been so scared in our lives, as we now knew what was potentially about to happen. Our fate was inevitable. The burst came and went. The two started sobbing again. As far as I could tell, we were all safe. I broke down with relief, as it was one issue we no longer had to deal with. One of them stopped crying.
Elizabeth?
I called out.
I'm here, James. I'm here.
Elizabeth cried. That same screech came out of the speakers. It was so loud my eardrums were in searing pain. I called for Pravina. It was already too late for her. She was in the pod room. Elizabeth was the only thing on my mind at the time. I had a clear path to get to her. She was in the communications room. I went over and joined her there. We had an hour left. The two of us knew that there was no chance of repairing the ring without Pravina. Pravina started pounding on her door as the transformation was complete. I am recording this from that room with Elizabeth. I don't know if my story will reach Earth. Even if it did, it would be too late for us, as it takes a whole 4 years with lightspeed communications. We're just too far away. Pravina just busted out of the pod room. She knows where we are, and has started trying to do the same to this door. I don't know how long we have left. I don't know what will get us first. Pravina or the next burst. All I know is, we don't want to die in either fashion. I'm contemplating evacuating the air from this room. Elizabeth agreed and started sobbing uncontrollably. I am embracing her with one arm and recording this with the other. The air is getting thin. Humans can survive about 6 minutes without oxygen. It is an agonizing death, but it is far better than the alternative. I do not regret going on this mission. Neither does Elizabeth. We're fortunate to make our world proud. If you're hearing this message, please, stay away from Proxima Centauri. It is not what it seems. The room is now completely void of oxygen. Elizabeth has gone unconscious. I am devastated, but I know I won't be that way for much longer. Only one thing left to do. Send